X-Men 97 episode 8, and all I have to say is, oh my goodness. This episode held nothing back, even giving us our first look at Doom inside of the MCU. Salutations and fist bumps, folks. Welcome back to the grid. As per usual, with this series, we have zero time. Let's ride. Now, as the recap starts, we hear the voice of Scott.
Previously on X-Men. Right now, we have to be strong for the team.
Which up until now, we have never heard his voice starting the episode. So what that tells me is that this is going to pick up really fast. We also get a glimpse of Storm when she finds out about Genosha, which actually sets up a teaser for the later part of the episode, but we don't see her until officially the very last moment. From there, notice that we don't get the same somber opening that we had become accustomed to since episode 5, starting with episode 6. Which is yet another clue that this episode is going to pick up very fast, and every episode after that is probably going to do the same. Also, notice that even though we know that Eric Magneto is alive, we don't know where he is, and he doesn't assume his leadership position inside of the credits, which he had held up until episode 5, which started in episode 2. Now, Apocalypse has to be on the way at some point very soon, because we have now seen him in the credits about 3 to 4 episodes straight. Per reports, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is apparently supposed to maybe play him in the live action version inside the MCU. And after Black Adam, let's just keep those as talks, okay? Anyway, when we see Scott battling robots inside of the credits, this is a reanimation that is pulled directly from the credits of the original animated series, which also follows with Storm, which also was actually inside of the same sequence in the animated series opening sequence as well. And also, I admittedly missed this before, but going back and doing my homework, I rewatched One Man's Worth, which can be found in season 4, episode 9 and 10, which is a 2-part series, where Logan and Storm are taken back to 1959, where they're actually married as well. And this is where the suits that they are wearing actually come from. So I missed that in a previous breakdown, but I'm rectifying it here. And this particular battle happens at the end of the first episode in that event. Something else to note about those episodes is that Logan mentions without Magneto, we lose the war.
No choice, darling. We gotta help the leader. We lose Magneto. We lose the war.
Which seems to be the exact same thing that we're setting up for in this episode, which actually is ironic that at the end of the episode, Logan actually says he did it, which basically is to say that he started the war. And just like episode 8 in this series, or just like in this episode, Logan is the catalyst for a lot of the fighting that happens inside of One Man's Worth, both episode 1 and 2. Now, as the episode opens, we hear the laser blasters coming from Cable's gun, which actually sound exactly the same way that they sounded in One Man's Worth, which sounds like he has taken the same gun that Bishop also has. And we then hear Scott describing Nathan's mutant ability, which is basically leaving the room every time Scott comes in, which is also ironic because Scott did the exact same thing to him when he was a baby.
I'm sorry.
Actually, it's an absolute point, which we'll get into a little bit later in the video. But this also tells a story about time traveling as it pertains to Nathan Summers, because every time that he's tried to stop the event of Genosha happening, he always gets pulled back inside of time. So temporally, he's always one step away from actually stopping it, but he can't. But this does not happen inside of One Man's Worth, which they are able to go back in time a bunch of times actually and save Xavier. So he has to be available in order for everything to actually work out. But at the same time, Genosha has to happen, unfortunately. And as Cable describes this, Beast seconds him. And notice while all of this is going on, Logan's animation does not change because it's the exact same from scene to scene from the time that they show him the first time to when he blows up or right before he blows up. It's the exact same features and body language that he has from scene to scene. Now that's what I call focus, or some clever animation, or maybe just some shortcut animation. But yet again, Morph is now talking about Logan's age because he says,
so another dystopia where Logan's the last to die.
Which actually again is a nod to the fact that he's about or over 100 years plus. And then as Nathan gives the Utopia explanation, we see Rachel Summers. But then Beast mentions Carmitage, which is the exact same place that we've seen in Doctor Strange's movies. Specifically, we've seen it up close and personal in Multiversal Madness. And this is where sorcerers are actually trained, and specifically at this point would be headed up by Wong because he is the Sorcerer Supreme. But in this conversation, he also mentions absolute points inside of the multiverse. As I alluded to earlier in the video, absolute points are events inside of the multiverse that has to happen. And this is something that was kind of loosely mentioned inside of Endgame by the Ancient One.
The Infinity Stones create what you experience as the flow of time. Remove one of the stones, and that flow splits. Now this may benefit your reality, but my new one, not so much.
Can your science prevent all that?
No, we can erase it. Because once we're done with the stones, we can return each one to its own timeline at the moment it was taken.
And also mentioned by He Who Remains in Loki. But at this point, a clear definition hasn't really been drawn out because it's also happened inside of What If as well. And those events could not be changed, specifically inside of episode 4 with Doctor Strange. But as a sort of definition, if the multiversal flow of these events is disturbed in any way, it will cause everything to implode on itself, which is also why the Watcher is inside of episode 5 before the events of Genosha actually happen in this universe. Jean then remembers the last moments that Madeline actually had because not only was she able to feel them, and I believe that they both felt them in real time, so she felt exactly what Madeline was feeling. She also most likely felt it when she came back to Genosha and experienced all of the memories that were left untouched because of the battle that happened in Genosha. Then as Nathan and Scott have their father-son moment, Logan says,
"Aw, Daddy's home."
Which, by the way, is a 2015 movie that starred Mark Wahlberg and Will Ferrell. But then Jean points out on the TV that Charles is alive.
Both of you, stop it. Look.
Oh, great Scott!
And they had no idea. But this shows an antiquated report that most likely was leaked by Bastion because no one had this footage except for him, at least from what we can see inside of these episodes. Then as Roberto's mom sets up for a wino benefit party, we see William Stryker on the TV in the background, who himself is an anti-mutant scientist who has a half-mutant son because of him, because only males can pass the mutant gene. And Stryker has ties to Hydra as well. So does that mean that Hydra may be making a resurgence inside of the MCU at some point? And when Jubes says retail therapy, I had to go and look that up to make sure that it was actually available inside of the 90s, and I was pleasantly surprised because as it turns out it happened or was coined before the 90s in the 1980s, specifically in 1986 in the Christmas Eve edition of the Chicago Tribune. The more you know. But then as Jean talks about the shared memories between her and Maddie, she mentions pregnancy cravings of oranges and cottage cheese. Now that is probably some of the weirdest cravings in terms of pregnancy cravings that I've ever heard. And we now get a direct origin for Nightcrawler inside of this series, which is slightly attributed to the comic because, as we've discussed previously, he was abandoned by his mother, Mystique. But this telling takes a bit of a twist on the fact that him and Rogue are adoptive siblings, because in a way he mentions that they met by chance instead of Rogue being adopted by Mystique and then living with them. Then as Sinister plays in his lab, we hear the voice of Val Cooper opening the scene, and she mentions Dr. Mengele,
Bastion's very own Dr. Mengele,
whose full name is Dr. Joseph Mengele, aka the Angel of Death, who first appears in comics in Spider-Man Black Cat, The Evil Men Do, Volume 1, Number 5, which is slightly ironic in two particular situations, because according to sources, Marvel and Sony could be nailing down Black Cat very soon, and we also see Spidey inside of this episode for this series. But Sinister says that he knew Mengele and that he could have been more than a Nazi puppet, which also gives a slight nod to the fact that Hydra may be around the corner somewhere.
Hail Hydra.
But similar to what Sinister is doing here, Mengele believed that harvesting mutant tissue could be the beginning of a master race, which is basically what Sinister was trying to create when he infected Nathan with the nanovirus. And it's also the exact same thing that he's using when he's trying to or partnering with Bastion to create Prime Sentinels. We then get a reference to Genosha and the remembrance of concentration camps by Eric, by the tattoo that is on his arm. 214782, which we have seen that same tattoo in X-Men First Class, X-Men Last Stand, and it originally showed up in comics in Uncanny X-Men Volume 1, number 161. Then Patricia shows back up with a peace offering for Beast, which comes after their falling out over their tolerance situation, which again is very ironic because this entire episode is based on tolerance being a form of extinction. But this is also true to form because of their relationship inside of the comics, because they go on and off a bunch of different times. And this gets real Fatal Attraction like when she actually turns on him because she is a Prime Sentinel. But when she first comes in, Beast says, "I didn't recognize you without your camera." And you can tell that that man is hurt because the last time that she was actually with him, she shooed away her cameraman, but he doesn't remember any of that. And she also tells him that she's not going to do any more yellow journalism, which is a different way of saying that she was doing more sensationalist situations and she's not going to do any more clickbait stuff. Then as Scott, Cable, and Jean walk inside of the childhood home of Bastion, the community that surrounds it seems or feels very Resident Evil-esque. And as they head into the home, you can see in the moving box a brochure for the Stark Expo, which we've seen in Iron Man movies, specifically in Iron Man 2. And we also get a glimpse of a toy Sentinel. And of course, his mother has been waiting for them the whole time. And it's not just to give them cookies either. But as she packs, we get a further glimpse into how Bastion actually grew up, which now sets his origin for this series. But this is also what Madeline and Jean actually encountered in the first episode of this series when they see the master mode on the astral plane, because as they fall you can see a young hand which is drawing a picture which is the same exact picture that Bastion is drawing here. And even more ironic to that situation, Bastion hears Master Mode speaking to him and saying that he is going to be the most powerful mutant. And also within this memory, we get a glimpse of Nimrod as well, because of Bastion's father's infection by the machine. Because similar to a character like Alex Mack, Nimrod can move, at least established in this series, as if he's like a jelly substance on the floor and then infecting a person, which in this case would be Bastion's father. And I assume that that happens because he attaches himself to the electricity in the human body. But Nimrod is also seen in the One Man's Worth event. So again, that ties back into this episode because a lot of the situation that is happening is coming from one specific man, and that is his father. Enter Val once again, and she now scolds Bastion for what happened in Genosha.
You should have warned us about Genosha.
Well, I did. But I also said bully an underdog too long and people start feeling sorry for them.
To which Bastion mentions that Gyrick actually messed up their entire plan because of what he does in terms of killing or trying to kill Charles. And in the comics, OZT is actually halted because of two people, Gyrick and Robert Kelly. Then we get some pretty big Marvel villains thrown at us inside of the next scene, which include Dr. Doom and Baron Zemo. Bastion then mentions that in 100 years, humans are outnumbered 100 to 1 by mutants, suggesting that he has seen or experienced this future a few times. And it also means that he has experienced the time period that Cable and Bishop hail from, which is 2055, because 100 years from the point of this particular series in 97 would be 2097. In the monologue that he is mentioning the Prime Sentinel army that he is building, he mentions dial-up chat rooms, which at that point would have been AOL. And for all of the younger folks that are watching at this point, that would be Discord, because AOL was available inside of the earliest form of the internet. And then Grandma hits the robot and the Quan at the same time, and this is where everything starts to pick up. Which then leads us to Weisserman's, which for me looks like a shop on the Magnificent Mile in Chicago. But as Jubes and Roberto are having their retail therapy fun, a call for the Sentinels goes up, changing a good portion of the world's population into Prime Sentinels, including none other than Patricia Tilby, which then she starts rolling heads inside of the mansion, including Wolverine. But the transition between him getting knocked around outside of the mansion and going back to Bastion's home when the Summers crew is actually knocked out of his home, it is seamless, almost to the fact that you think that we're still watching the mansion, because if you're not paying attention close enough, you might believe it. Then stuff blows up, and in the mall chaos before Jubes and Roberto head out, you can see a record store behind Jubes, which is called Jam Jam, which in the 90s would have either been FYE or Sam Goody. And as I said earlier in the video, those protesters are not your regular FOH we hate mutants protesters, because a good portion of them turn into primes as well. Then more stuff blows up, Wolverine goes ham, and there's a bunch of creepy eyes watching Rogue as she's sleeping. Yeesh. But inside of this sequence, we get another beautifully iconic line in this series when Wolverine says,
I got 6 reasons why.
No, mein Freund, 9.
And at this point, everything is just dope. There's not a whole lot that I was able to break down in this particular sequence in terms of all the fighting. I was just watching it at this point. But it is dope to see Nightcrawler use all 3 of those swords simultaneously to take out each and every one of the primes in front of him. And it also was cool to see the back-to-back of Wolverine and Nightcrawler as he does this, which made me think about the Rocket and Groot situation inside of Guardians of the Galaxy. And we also get a glimpse of what it would be like to teleport with Nightcrawler or as Nightcrawler through the perspective of Wolverine, which the MCU has done this another time inside of Multiversal Madness in terms of going through a particular time frame a bunch of different ways. But as we teleport, we head to the outside of the mansion where Nightcrawler is visibly tired, as he should be. And then more stuff blows up and Jubes is trying to figure out how she's going to make the jump from one building to the next. And she figures out that she does not have the power of flying, but Roberto does, because he's been practicing in the danger room, which is ironic at this point because when we first saw him, he thought the danger room was just a joke. Scott wrecks another plane, which Beast won't be too happy about because he's now done this 3 times, but at least he has a Porsche.
You have a Porsche.
But also, the moment between Nathan and Jean is a dope wrinkle to actually uncover because she talks to him as if she's his mother.
Come on, use a seatbelt.
Which I technically no, but also yes at the same time by default, because biologically she isn't. But in this moment, the way that she's speaking to him is completely mother-esque and he just goes with it, even though he groans about it like a teenager. And this whole don't mess with the Summers bit is one of my favorite parts of this episode. Well, I had a lot of them. So like I said, one of them is here. Then inside of the benefit for Genosha, we see Roberto crash land inside of the party because, like he said earlier, he's still having trouble with landing and steering. But the Prime Sentinels that follow him are incredibly intelligent because they're available or able to read the room and understand that they need to calm down on the fighting bit and actually talk as normal human. And then his mother actually says to go with them, which makes me suspicious about if she is actually a Prime Sentinel herself, all the while making mutants in this entire room look like bad guys. So this entire Genosha situation seems like it might be just a ruse to get over on the fact that she is a Prime Sentinel herself. Then Bastion thinks that he's won until he finds out that Val has let Magneto go, which is more fuel to my fan theory fire that she possibly could be Mystique. And Magneto at this point has had enough, because he then uses his powers to set off a type of EMP the world over. We also get a cameo by Silver Samurai and Omega Red, who at this point is being held inside of a nuclear plant, and that plant at this point, because of what Magneto does to electricity, now loses power. So he might be coming out of that chamber very, very soon. And after Magneto's declaration of war, Wolverine makes a subtle mention about the professor in terms of saying,
"Where's the professor when you need him?"
And literally on cue, we see a spaceship hurling through the stars down towards Earth into the mansion. And like I said on a previous breakdown, he would show up as soon as the writers could write him in. And no sooner do I say that than a couple episodes after, he's available and shows up. And then not only does he show up, he says the most iconic lines inside of X-Men comics.
To me, my X-Men.
Which at this point is the first time that he's said this in this series, and specifically, he's the first person to ever say it in comic. But when he does, notice who he actually contacts: Beast, Scott, Storm, and Jean, all of whom have sort of held a leadership role in the ranks of the X-Men. But for me, it was even more shocking to see him contact Storm, because at this point, she hasn't been with the team for a while, since episode 2. Man, this series is absolutely bananas. Literally crazy every single moment that you're watching it, to the point where I actually went and found this thing and have been diving into a bunch of different storylines, because there's no telling what they're going to pick out to actually put inside this series. But if you're just like me on this nostalgic train at this point, go ahead and hit this series right up here. And if you want to go ahead and figure out all of the stuff that has been going on inside of X-Men 97, hit this playlist right over here. And until next time, y'all be smooth. Blurred out.